On the morning of August 6, 1945, the sky over Hiroshima tore open. In an instant, a flash of atomic fire hit temperatures of 4,000 degrees Celsius, vaporizing buildings and killing hundreds of thousands of civilians before they even realized what was happening. This atomic conclusion is at odds with the promises of the previous generation. Just 2 decades earlier, the world had celebrated the end of the First World War with a pledge that it would be the war to end all wars. The international community even built the League of Nations to guarantee that a global slaughter of that scale could never happen again. Yet, the League collapsed. Instead of lasting peace, the globe was dragged into a total war that claimed up to 80 million lives, erasing the boundary between soldiers on the front lines and the civilians in the cities. To figure out how humanity walked straight into the atomic fire of 1945, we have to look at the exact day the previous war ended and the specific economic ruin the victors chose to impose. When the Allies drafted the Treaty of Versailles in 1919, they sought to systematically dismantle the country, forcing the newly formed government into total submission. The treaty stripped away 13% of Germany's territory and seized its most valuable coal and iron regions. On top of that, the Allies imposed a crushing debt of £6.6 billion. They locked this punishment in with a war guilt clause, forcing an already broken and starving state to shoulder the absolute financial burden of the entire First World War. Desperate to survive and pay their debts, the German government tried to print their way out of the crisis. The value of their currency practically vanished in a matter of months. Money became so worthless that children used stacks of cash as building blocks, and people needed wheelbarrows full of bills just to buy a single loaf of bread. These extreme conditions stripped the German people of their savings, their identity, and their basic security, creating a desperate, humiliated populace primed to embrace radical ideas. Germany did find a brief window of stability, but it was shattered by the 1929 Wall Street crash in the United States, pulling the entire world into a deep economic depression. American financial lifelines to Germany evaporated, factories shut down, industrial production plummeted by 40%, and suddenly 6 million Germans were walking the streets without jobs. Adolf Hitler stepped into this vacuum of despair. Hitler recognized the anger boiling in the streets and weaponized it. Through manipulative speeches, he promised to tear up the Treaty of Versailles, take revenge on the nations that humiliated them, and restore German dominance. The global economic collapse gave Hitler the fuel he needed to win massive public support, dismantle the Democratic Republic, and install himself as an absolute dictator. By September 1939, Hitler was ready to expand. To justify invading Poland, Germany dressed its own soldiers in Polish uniforms, staged a fake attack on themselves, and then crossed the border. This new conflict operated as a total war. Every factory, farm, and citizen was consumed by the war effort. Because civilians were now essential to keeping the armies supplied, they became primary military targets. Initially, the German war machine seemed unstoppable. They bypassed standard defenses and forced France, a major global power, into a surrender in a matter of days. But blinded by early success, Hitler made his first fatal miscalculation. He ripped up a non-aggression pact with the Soviet Union and launched Operation Barbarossa, a massive invasion into Eastern Europe. The reality of the Russian winter, combined with fierce Soviet resistance, broke the German momentum. The Soviet army forced them into a slow retreat all the way back to Berlin. Simultaneously, the Axis powers made a second catastrophic error. Japan launched a surprise attack on the U.S. fleet at Pearl Harbor, dragging the untouched American industrial powerhouse directly into the fight. What started as a swift European conquest was now a two-front global meat grinder against the largest militaries on Earth, driven by the hubris of the Axis leadership. The war's total impact reached deep into the furthest corners of the colonial empires. To feed its own war machine, the British Empire redirected grain and raw materials out of India. This extraction caused the 1943 Bengal famine, starving roughly 3 million innocent civilians to death. The extraction included people. Over 87,000 Indian troops lost their lives fighting a war dictated entirely by their colonizers. By 1945, the fascist regimes collapsed. Germany was reduced to a landscape of rubble, and Hitler took his own life in an underground bunker. Japan continued to fight, leading the United States to deploy atomic weapons, the final lethal extension of a conflict where civilians had become primary targets. When the smoke finally cleared, millions of people were dead, entire European economies were bankrupt, and the physical borders of the world were rewritten. This devastation bankrupted the era of imperialism. Weakened colonial powers could no longer maintain their grip, empowering nations across Asia and Africa, including India, to successfully demand their freedom. Trying to salvage order from the ashes, the victorious nations established the United Nations, hoping for a second time to prevent another global conflict. Yet, almost immediately, ideological divides split the victors apart, locking the United States and the Soviet Union into a tense, decades-long Cold War. The history of the conflict shows that drowning a defeated nation in economic despair doesn't guarantee peace. It creates a vacuum for dictators to rise, eventually dragging the rest of humanity right back into the fire.